Joining us now is David Dayen. He is the executive editor of the American Prospect and a great friend of the show. It's good to see you, David. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So, David, I have been fascinated by this term of vendor finance. I didn't realize, I'm too young to actually remember .com, but luckily we have experts like you who can go through and can write all about how we're just living through the exact same crazy scenario. But before we actually even get to that, we wanted to get your reaction to the Amazon Web Service crash that just happened, which highlights this architecture which runs our entire economy, our entire digital life, and a single point of failure, literally a prospect of what it's like to live under monopoly. Let's put this up here on the screen. Everybody, especially here on the East Coast, woke up immediately. Multiple apps are not working. Huge outage. You had banks, you had music services, so many different things where you had the single point of failure from a single server here in Northern Virginia in our area. And I mean, just from a monopoly point of view, David, and especially the fact that their stock went up even after the crash, what does that tell you about this world that we live in?
Well, I'm painfully aware of it because we couldn't get our newsletters out yesterday.
Yeah.
They've run on with a company that was involved in the mess. I'd go back to a different recession, which is the Great Recession of 2008, which was characterized by what is known as tight coupling. In other words, the banks were all tied in with one another, and so when there was a failure in the mortgage-backed securities market, that cascaded throughout the rest of the economy. And you see similar couplings here with respect to the cloud service and the internet, and it's a really dangerous situation. Obviously, because it's not just my newsletter and Netflix and things like that are on there, but actually really important things on the cloud that people need to have every day.
Like healthcare technology would be the first that I would think of, like, is the kind of thing you don't want to go down. Transportation as well. And then we'll get into this other reporting because it very much is related. How do you think AI and crypto and blockchain played into this crash? And it was concentrated in Virginia. Apparently the DSN finishes right in here in Virginia, which also happens, I don't know if it's coincidence, also happens to be where the CIA and a lot of the other infrastructure around surveillance and backdoors is as well. So you've got the surveillance, AI, blockchain, and then monopoly. Like, what do you think is the driving factor here that produced this cascading collapse?
Well, Virginia is maybe the data center head of the entire country. There is a tremendous amount of data centers there, and it stands to reason because there's so much compute needs. I just think that when you layer on onto these systems, and AWS is the biggest cloud infrastructure that we have in the world. And when you just keep adding and adding and adding to it, you do create these single points of failure. You do create the ability for things to break down, and they have bigger consequences when that happens. You see this in airlines where one glitch creates thousands of delays on flights. It's the same kind of dynamic.
Yeah, and this really gets to the heart of what I wanted to talk to you about. Can we go ahead and put G3 up on the screen? And you write about these circular finance deals that continue to see in the economy, this prospect of vendor finance, where basically what happens is you sign a deal with a company, they give you a part of that company, the stock goes up, which effectively erases the so-called price that you paid. Billions of dollars in so-called value have been created, but nothing has actually happened, been produced, and or been paid. It doesn't seem to make any sense, but it's fueling the rise of all of these different companies. And it's even more importantly, we talk about single point of failure. It's the only reason our stock market is up at all. Without it, we would be in a recession.
Yeah, something like 80% of the stock gains this year are related to AI-linked companies. Something I've heard another stat that data center infrastructure build out is responsible for maybe 50% of the gains in GDP. So obviously, we've put a big bet on AI, and companies like NVIDIA in particular, but there are others. These big companies that sell things. They sell, in the case of NVIDIA, GPUs, which are the high-end chips that run these AI data centers. They need customers. So what they're doing is actually creating their own demand. They sell they invest in companies, startup companies, whether they are companies that make data centers like CoreWeave, or even companies that make AI models, because NVIDIA just did a huge deal with OpenAI for $100 billion. So they invest in these companies, and then these companies turn around and use that money to build data centers, which need GPUs, which NVIDIA makes. So it's really circular. I've heard it called round tripping as well. And our contributor at the Prospect, Brian McMahon, referred to it as the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail.
So help me understand how this keeps going, because I want to try to. It's very hard for me to get my head around this. So, like, let's say I run an apple orchard, right? And I make a ton of apples, but nobody wants to buy my apples. So I take money that I have and I give it to my neighbor, and my neighbor uses the money to buy my apples. So now I have the same amount of money that I started with, but I don't have my apples anymore.
Right.
Explain to me how this doesn't just all end in tears.
There are all these people on the sidelines that say, "Oh, you created another demand for your apples, and so we're going to give you more money because you're obviously running a very good business where you have a lot of demand."
So I've doubled my money. More money's coming in.
That's the stock market, right? That's investors on the sidelines saying, "This sounds good, NVIDIA. You're creating your own demand." And so it doesn't stop until the music stops, and we've seen this before, as Saagar alluded to. In the 1990s, there was an infrastructure build out of fiber infrastructure that was needed for the web, and Cisco was really the company at the center of it, and they were engaging in this vendor financing for these startups that were creating fiber optic layout. And it was all great until it turned out that nobody really needed pets.com anymore. And at that point, Cisco lost 80% of its value. Yes. So we have been here before. It sounds great and it works great until it doesn't. We don't know when that time's going to be. If I knew that, I would be a very rich man. But what we know is that it doesn't feel like it can last forever.
So that's my last question, David. One way I've been kind of coping on why it won't is the economy, in my opinion, was a lot more real in 1999. In 2000, we actually did build stuff. It wasn't great. It was still financialized, but it was still, there was something actually happening in the U.S. economy. Now, this is it. Like if 80% of stock gains and 50% of data center is GDP, the system cannot afford a crash. Now that hasn't necessarily stopped it before, but why wouldn't they just pull out all the stops to say, actually, no, the crash is not happening because our entire economic livelihood depends on it?
It's certainly possible that that's only operative if you believe in a they. Yeah. If you believe that there's no other force that can thrust reality into being. I mean, the similarities. People are making a lot of connections to 1990, the 1990s, and the .com build out. And by the way, you can have a build out of a physical good, but still have it end with a financial crash. I mean, railroads had bubbles when they were being built out. The Transcontinental Railroad led to the Panic of 1873 and things like this that were really terrible depressions. So technologies can be useful, but the financing behind them can still be really, really bad. And so I relate this as much to the financial crisis as I do to the .com build out. And there are even some of the same players. Ryan might remember the name Magnetar. They were a hedge fund that they would basically build these mortgage-backed securities and then bet against them. Mm-hmm. Yes. This is like right at the end of the bubble. Magnetar is the leading institutional investor in CoreWeave, one of these companies that builds data centers.
Magnetar's still around?
Yes, they never went away. And so here we are 20 years later, close to 20 years later, and CoreWeave is at the heart. This is one of these companies that they've never made any money, but they have a lot of investment, and it's kind of Wile E. Coyote not looking down at the ground and seeing nothing situation. And so when I heard Magnetar was involved, I got heart palpitations a little bit.
Wow.
And Zuckerberg actually, I'm sure you noticed this, he brought up the railroad example himself. You know, he said, you know, just like in the railroad example, you know, this was infrastructure that was needed, and there was a huge bubble, and a lot of rail lines got built that went to nowhere because, you know, the companies went bankrupt, and, you know, there was just money to be made in saying that you were going to build a railroad, and then money would come in, you'd pay off the politicians who would then give you the easements, and you pay the politicians off in stock in the railroad. That was some of those big scandals at the time. And then the bubble popped, and as Zuckerberg said, and a lot of companies got wiped out, but we had some rail lines laid down. And then the oligarchs could come in and buy up cheap assets, which also Zuckerberg said. So what's going to happen? From Zuckerberg's perspective, there will be a bust. I don't know if it'll be as bad as like the 1873 or the 1890s, but then the oligarchs that survive come in and buy up everything for very cheap, and then kind of do it all again. And, you know, it took us until the Progressive Era and then the New Deal to sort that out. I don't know if we're on a shortened time frame or what this time around.
Well, I mean, certainly if you think about what would happen in the aftermath of something like this popping, and the pop can come from any way, whether it's China coming up with models that turns out they don't need a ton of infrastructure to be built to do, or you know, we find out that AI has a plateau, and it's you know, cat videos aren't you know, God in the machine. Whatever it is, what do we think if it happens under this administration? We're pretty sure that there's probably going to be a bailout of some sort, because you know, we're seeing it right now in farming. I mean, you know, if you have a connection or a closeness to this administration, they're going to take care of you. And so that scenario that you just put out there, where the oligarchs, the tech lords come in, and they're kind of, it's almost that they're incubating themselves or isolating themselves from the pain by engaging in these financial games, because ultimately it's going to be retail investors and these small companies like CoreWeave that can be sort of jettisoned off, and then the oligarchs that are throwing off their own cash flow can come in and take over.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your insight, David. Really rely on the work that you guys do. And I think that this is genuinely one of the most important issues in the U.S. economy. So thank you for breaking it down. We'll see you later, man. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show. Help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.